Can I hold your hand?
Yes, ma'am.
I am more than excited to be with my Spelman sister, Nyla.
Naya.
Naya.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the meaning of Naya?
I'm not sure.
You need to find out.
I do.
You need to find out.
I will.
You promise?
I do.
All right.
Hi, Dr. Cole. Such an honor for me to meet you. I'm Caleb Cage. I'm a rising junior at Morehouse College, religion major on the pre-law track from Prince George's County, Maryland. So it's just a great honor and privilege for me to be able to meet you and to experience this deep African-American history that you are so deeply connected to. It's just an honor to meet you and talk with you today.
And I can use language you used, and it is sincerely used. It's my honor, my Morehouse brother, to be with you. But I got to add to honor, joy.
Yes, absolutely.
Give me your name once again.
Caleb Cage.
Caleb.
Yes, ma'am.
Glad to be with you, Caleb. And I'm going to reach across, Caleb, and take the hands of my other Spelman sister.
It's nice to meet you. My name is Kannette. I'm also a recent graduate of Spelman College, and it is so brings me so much joy to be in your presence and all of your glory and your knowledge and your wisdom. So thank you for being here with us today.
And I can say, back at you. And the reason I say that is because I'm convinced that any really good experience, any rich experience, any rewarding experience has got to involve reciprocity. So you all may have come to learn from me, but I'm going to learn from you too. And it's a lesson that I acquired a long time ago. I'm willing to put out, I'm willing to teach, but I expect to learn. There's a good old African proverb that says, she who teaches must learn, and she who learns must teach. So in that spirit, I'm ready.
So I guess because of where we are in this space and our journey about learning about A.L. Lewis, I want to know what his impact was in your life, and if you ever met him, if he had any words of wisdom, or even just the spirit of his entrepreneurship and his leadership in the Black community, what impact that had on you.
Oh, I did know my great-grandfather, Abraham Lincoln Lewis. He always preferred to be called A.L. Lewis. But I knew that great man, born in 1865 in Madison County, Georgia, born of enslaved parents. But he was born free, 1865, and so therefore Judy and Robert Lewis named him for the man who was called the Great Emancipator. I was born in 1936. A.L. Lewis went to glory in 1947. So yes, not only did I know him, if I am asked who are the individuals who had the most influence on my life, I got a name, Fafa. That's what the beach lady and I called him. It's a common practice, children who are having difficulty with long names will find short names, or they will purposefully find an enduring term. We called him Fafa. He was both bigger than life and incredibly touchable for us. Let me give you a story, because you know, sometimes that's the easiest way to describe something, to communicate, is to tell a story. A.L. Lewis was a deeply religious man. For 50 years, he was the superintendent of a Sunday school. And if we could go up this street just a little piece, we would be at the home where James Staten, my husband, and I live. And I would immediately take you to see his desk that I and my husband are so privileged to have in our home. Well, after church at Mount Olive AME Church on the east side of Jacksonville, where A.L. Lewis would have rung the bell, and that bell sits on the desk in our home to start Sunday school, he would get in his Lincoln car. This was Florida's first black millionaire. And with his second wife, Elzona Lewis, they would drive to their home on Sugar Hill. People called it a mansion because it was. And the beach lady and I would get in the back of the car with our mom and dad, and we would be dropped off at A.L. Lewis's home on 8th and Jefferson Streets. The desk is important that I just described because this very religious, very proper man, even on the beach, A.L. Lewis always wore a tie and his Pandora, all right? So when we would enter the home, no doubt Mama Zone, we called his second wife Mama Zone, would be preparing dinner. Now I'm going to tell you how rich these folk were. Mama Zone was cooking chicken, not in lard, but in olive oil, all right? Okay. The beach lady, who I'm assuming you have met through being in this museum, you know about my incredible sister. We were allowed to play only 2 games. It was Sunday. You couldn't be outside doing jump rope, even if it was, and I was the queen of it. Woo! Could I do double dutch? You don't know how to do double dutch?
I don't.
Okay. I admit it's kind of a girl's thing. We had to sit and play at the desk. And we could only play 2 games. Regular school or Sunday school. But that's okay. Children have incredible imaginations. So Sunday after Sunday, we would play our games. At a certain point, usually before dinner was ready, and he would come to call us for dinner, this was quite a privilege. My sister and I on Sundays having dinner with A.L. Lewis and Mama Zone. So he would come by and he'd say, "Girls?" And we'd say, "Yes, Fafa." And we'd immediately stand up. He had the same question every Sunday. "Girls, what are the 3 B's that you're going to live by?" And we would take turns. One Sunday my turn, next Sunday beach lady's turn. You'd stand up and you'd say, "Fafa, we are going to live by the 3 B's. The Bible, the school book, and the bank book." Listen to the wisdom. Faith, education, self-reliance. One more thing. I was born in 1936. A year later, A.L. Lewis and Elzona Lewis, and you may have heard this as you came into the museum and our sister director Carol told you about this, or you may have heard it when you were at Kingsley with my niece Perry. But in 1937, A.L. Lewis and his second wife, Elzona, got on a steamer, went to Europe, and from Europe to Egypt. On that same desk that I described in our home are some mementos from that trip. Why am I raising this? Why am I seeing now that photograph that you have seen here somewhere in the museum of A.L. Lewis and Elzona Lewis on camels in front of a pyramid? Because he was my first teacher about Africa. This man was profoundly Afrocentric. Look what he chose as the name for the company that he and 6 other black men founded. Afro-American. The year was 1901. Who was using that language in 1901? A.L. Lewis. Because it was he who named the company. In short, he taught me about faith. He certainly taught me about education, about self-reliance. But the final B was he taught me about black people.
Wow. Wow. So Dr. Cole, that's just an amazing and impressive story about the things that your great-grandfather taught you as a child. And so I just imagining those kind of values that were instilled in your family, can you talk about, I guess, some of those values that have influenced your own personal success, and if you feel like those values still exist in black families in our modern society?
It's a good question. Especially the last part is a very poignant question. No question. I was taught and taught well. And when you say, well, who were your major teachers? It's not going to surprise you that I would say my parents. They were unusual folk. First of all, for 2 black folk of that era to be graduates of, are you ready? Historically black colleges. My mother, because I grew up and that family was profoundly AME, my mother went to Morris Brown as a high school student.
Wow.
She then went to Wilberforce and graduated as an English major. All right? Is that your major? Went on to teach at Edward Waters College, now university, before entering the Afro-American Life Insurance Company and becoming the treasurer. My daddy, and you know about my maternal line, because you at Kingsley, my father, John Betch, the son of a black woman, my grandma, and a German brick mason. And we don't know a lot about them, but what we do know, much of it comes, by the way, through records like the Green Book. Because Maddie Betch and her husband had one of those homes where black people would go when they got to Henderson, North Carolina, because you weren't staying in nobody's white hotel. So they were my teachers, my mom and my dad. But also my teachers were literally my teachers. Like in Jacksonville, Florida, in those days of segregated schools, most of which have now been resegregated, but by zip code, okay? We just figured race was not doing a good enough job, so we'll use zip codes.
Right.
I can't tell you how much I learned from Miss Bunny Vance, my first grade teacher. But I'll tell you quickly the story, and then we come to A.L. Lewis. It's the first day of school. Now, I got these pushy black parents, right? They're graduates of HBCUs. These people believe in education like the devil believes in sin. So my sister and I can't just wait till we're 6. We got to go to first grade when we're 5. Well, the beach lady you already know because you've met her here was more flamboyant, more out there than you can imagine. So for her, going to 6th grade was a chance for her to see what she could do. Since I was the shy one, and she thought I was her handmaiden, all right? I am scared. But fortunately, I'm off, 5 years old, to Miss Bunny Vance's first grade class. And I'm holding the hand of my best friend, B.B. Ross, like my life depends on it. So we get into the classroom, and I am so nervous. And we're all sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden the door opens, and it's like, a storm, but a storm of goodness is coming. And enters Miss Bunny Vance. She was short in stature, but her power, I mean, I can remember this. I'm 86 years old. It's like yesterday. Miss Bunny Vance walks in and she says, "Girls and boys, stand up and good morning." So we all stand up. And she says something else. And then she says, "You may be seated." And she starts at one end of the room. Fortunately, I'm at the other end. Because I'm thinking, if she calls on me now, I'm just going to die. It's the only thing I can do. But she starts at the other end. And she asks each child to get up, introduce herself, himself. Today we would be inclusive enough to say their self. But she works her way around. Oh no, it's coming. So she's now at this end of the classroom. And she says, "Girls and boys at this end of the classroom, stand up." So we all stand up. And she comes in front of each child. Then she comes in front of me and she says, "And you, who are you? Introduce yourself." And I remember just praying, "God, if you let me through this, I promise you I will never do anything else that is bad." And I bowed my head and I said, I'm Johnetta Betch." This voice said, "Johnetta, stand up, straight. Look at me directly into my eyes and never again mumble your name. Remember, in this class, we are preparing leaders." You want to know who taught me? A Miss Vance. Second story. I know I said I was getting the A up, but I got to sneak this one in.
Of course.
All right. So I come to believe, Miss Vance, I'm to be a leader. Now, we were in the segregated schools of Jacksonville, Florida. Our parents decided, especially since the school board said, well, you know, these colored children can only learn so much anyway. And we're a little tight on our resources and all. So we're just going to have them go to school half a day. And my parents said, So we were put into a school called Boylan Haven, a famous all-girls school for black girls, where all the teachers, Methodist school, were white women, couple of black men, one black woman.
Wow.
Well, it's one day in Latin class. I now believe what Miss Bunny Vance said. I'm a leader. So after class, I called my girls together. I said, listen, after recess, when we go back in, I'm going to give the signal. When I give the signal, don't let Miss Morse, that's the little white lady, she had purple hair, all tightly permed, purple because she put too much dye in it. And I said, when I give the signal, don't let Miss Morse, that was her name, see you with your lips moving. But here's what we're going to say. Latin, Latin, dead as can be. First it killed the Romans, now it's killing me. All right, I got my girls. I'm a leader. In we go to class. I give the signal, and we do it. And you know what Miss Morse did? Ignored us.
Wow.
Well, that was no fun. So the next day, we go in, give the signal. But this time, Miss Morse said, you girls listen to me. You have just done your little rhyme. Latin, Latin, dead as can be. First it killed the Romans, now it's killing me. You listen to me. You are not in this class to learn about dead Roman men. You are in this class to learn, it would have been her language at that time, that is, colored girls, you can learn anything. That's who taught me. And then I'd have to say, I learned so much from A.L. Lewis, who we'll talk about later. But I'm going to end by saying, in response to this question, that I learned so much early in my life from one of Abraham Lincoln Lewis's besties. That's language y'all use. I learned it from you. Come on, I want a little praise. I mean, all right, I used your language, young uns. A.L. Lewis and Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune were besties. She convinced him to serve on the board of Bethune-Cookman College. He convinced her to serve on the board of Edward Waters College. Here in this museum, the A.L. Lewis Museum, in our archives, we have an abundance of correspondence between the race woman, Mary McLeod Bethune, and the race man, A.L. Lewis. They were very formal, even though they were so close. I mean, she did the eulogy, the obituary at his funeral. They were in constant communication. Most of the letters, my dear A.L. Lewis, we would be so grateful for a small contribution of. But that's okay. That's what college presidents do. They live in big houses and beg for a living. But despite their formality, they were really both very close and in such collaboration because they were a race man and a race woman. Because of their relationship, my sister and I could get to go to Daytona Beach, to Bethune-Cookman, and if Dr. Bethune was in her office, we could literally go to see her. Can you imagine, as somebody knee-high to a duck, being influenced, mentored, taught by the great Mary McLeod Bethune?
especially since she spent like so much of her life like really wanting to educate black girls, and how Bethune-Cookman was initially a school for black girls.
Well remembered. And especially because she founded the National Council of Negro Women. And so my path of not only learning but doing, because if we only learn, you only got half of the equation. You know, you're supposed to learn, but you're also supposed to do, to act. Well, I learned that from people like Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, that scholarship without service would be useless.
So, Dr. Cole, if you don't mind if I continue just like
Sure.
in sort of that vein about your professional career as an educator, as an anthropologist, as a college president, being around these influential figures like Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, your own mother, who was a college professor also, and your great-grandfather and parents who were adamant about education, as you mentioned before. Can you talk about sort of your goals as a young child, your professional goals as a young child, and how do you feel that you have achieved and accomplished all that you had set out to do?
The answer is no. And anybody who would tell you, excuse me, even toward the end, well, in the last, that we say, let us say, period of their life, that they've accomplished all that they want to, is probably not telling you the truth. I mean, who doesn't want to do more? I think it's human to want to do more. But I would respond by saying I'm grateful, profoundly grateful, for what I have been able to do. And so at this stage, you know, the question is, especially because I have a health challenge, a respiratory health challenge, the question is, what else can I get done before I take the big trip up to glory? I am counting on going in that direction. And I have now finally started to sort of slow down, to do less, but I want to write even more. And one of the things that I very much want to write is about my family. You all, the three of you, with your wonderful colleagues from the AU Center and your two wonderful profs, you've been through this museum. You see this story. You've been to Kingsley with my niece, Perry Frances Betch. But there's still not, in my view, that definitive work. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, we do have good scholarship. Daniel Schaefer, a retired professor from the University of Florida, has written some really rich, important books about Anta Majidin-Jai and about Zephaniah Kingsley. And there are films, and there are articles. And if you sit Perry Frances Betch down, she will give you details out of her lived experience of going to Senegal, meeting our cousins, seeing literally the street named now after my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. But we don't have that definitive book. And let me tell you what I mean by definitive. Another African proverb. Until the lion, and don't forget to add, and the lioness tell the story of the hunt, the story will always glorify the hunter.
Yes.
And so the work, in addition to my service and so many other things that I still would like to do, that I really want to do, is to write this story about our family.
What do you believe is still untold or that you feel that you have to get out about your family story?
That's really an intriguing question, and the way to answer it is to say, from your experiences, being students at Spelman and a student at Morehouse, you know that two people, if I put something right there, and one is looking at it from over there, and another is looking at it from over here, they will see the same thing, but they will not see the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Different perspectives.
Because it is from their perspective. And so what we don't have, and I should say, is that published volume from the perspective of a kinswoman. Yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Cole, speaking about your family, I know something that has been in my research on your family that has been talked about. I remember listening to an interview that your sister gave, and she talked a little bit about your mom and how growing up that you were more like your mom from her point of view than where she was more like you all's dad. So can you talk about sort of like your earliest memory of your mom and sort of that relationship and what it means to you?
I'd love to. In many ways, excuse me, I would say that my mom and my dad played the opposite roles that are stereotypes of women and men. My dad was the gushy one. He was the one who was just, I can remember so well because he had a wonderful mustache and he loved to kiss, but it was too much, and it was, but he was the gushy one. He was the huggy one. He loved to cook. My dad was the one who would take us to buy our new school shoes, and he was, you hear what I'm describing? My mom, who, by the way, could not cook well. I was a grown woman, married and learning to cook myself before I understood that vegetables didn't have to be boiled to death, then beaten down and boiled some more. I mean, she had no interest in cooking. My mom was the disciplinarian, which in classic kind of stereotypical terms you think of as the father, right? But they were quite a pair. And I would count as my blessings, and there's so many, to grow up in that family with the two of them. Now, I've talked about my sister. You have seen the Beach Lady in some of her operatic glory right behind us. You know her role, really, her role as the major force. You can't ever be the sole force, but she was a major force in making sure that this beach stays the way it is. But I haven't talked about my little brother, Perry's dad, because 9 years after I was born, and I should have been him, because John Thomas Betts Sr. put in an order for John Thomas Betts Jr., but when I came out and I wasn't the order that was put in, he just slapped Netta on the end of it.
Okay.
And we got Johnetta, right? All right. But we were three. But my one and only blood brother, born 9 years after I, lost our dad when he was a tot. I was only 15. And so the longest by period of years influence on me was my mom. But the short years that I knew my dad, until I was 15, he put a stamp on me.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
So I'd like to shift the conversation until your family lineage, I guess, at the Kingsley Plantation. And so in the conversation of movement, memory, and justice, and just understanding that reparations is a form of justice, at Spelman, through the social justice program, we have a reparations project, the Quarterman Keller Scholars, under the leadership of Dr. Cynthia Spence. And so it really is a project centered around the descendants of the enslaved and the descendants of the slave owners at a particular plantation. And so in knowing that you have a family connection to the slave owners at the Kingsley Plantation, what are your thoughts on reparations and what that can look like for Black communities?
A very quick and simple answer. We will not know justice until injustice is acknowledged and in some way paid for. It's as simple as that. Now I know all of the complex reasons that people give for and against reparations. But I don't see how you avoid this if you have ever understood the injustice. And so the reason that I think so many folk, white folk, can so quickly dismiss reparations is that they haven't understood the injustice. So that's my very quick but very sincere response.
Do you think the way that the plantation is today and sort of like a museum essentially to tell the story of what happened there is a form of reparations?
Many things, programs, processes can be a form of reparations. And I really, really like your use of that term. We tend to think, when we hear the word, we tend to think of material compensation. In many ways, what you periodically hear, to me, is one of the most powerful things. And that is when those who are associated with the indescribable brutality of enslavement acknowledge it. Acknowledge it. That it would help to have material resources to rebuild or to build from scratch things that we as a Black community need. But the least you can do is to admit the damage. Admit the damage.
So, Dr. Cole, while we're discussing modern social justice issues such as reparations, recently I'm sure you're aware of the Supreme Court decision regarding affirmative action and the ban on race-based consideration in college admissions. I was wondering, as a former college president yourself, of a historically HBCU like Spelman, the current president of my school, Morehouse, Dr. David A. Thomas, has spoken in various news articles saying that he believes that the decision will increase admissions, or applications rather, to HBCUs like Morehouse and Spelman. I would like to know, what are your views on the decision, and what do you think it means for HBCUs?
Well, first of all, I'm outraged by the decision. If I'm asked to indicate what I think have been the most unjust decisions of that Supreme Court over time, And there are some that clearly stand out. This is one of them.
Absolutely.
This is one of them. But we saw it coming. You know, even though when you see something coming, it doesn't mean that the pain and the outrage are lessened. When we look at that court that was so purposefully composed by Donald J. Trump, it was coming. Yes, I agree with Brother President David Thomas that the applications to HBCUs will increase substantially. And I have to add, that means those of us in our HBCU community, we now have a special responsibility to increase the resources to be able to respond to these applications. Your school, and I can't speak about yours, but let me tell you, it's getting to the point now where getting into Spelman College, I don't care how good your grades are, how much your community service is, how outstanding a student you are, your chances are not that good. There is only so much space. And so Brother President is right. But the responsibility now falls on alums, on anybody who believes in education to help our HBCUs have the resources. I mean, we can't, for your school and for yours, we can't accept now all of the students who want to come. What are we going to do when we have this influx?
Right. So, a question that I have, as the first woman to be president of Spelman College.
Not the first woman.
Not the first.
The
The
first
first black
black woman.
woman. The first black woman.
There you go.
And sitting on many boards, what do you believe your role or your purpose is in life?
My purpose in life is to serve. That's my purpose. I believe there are different ways that we can serve. And certainly education is one. And the reason it's fundamentally about service, in my view, is that when you are an educator and you do your job well, you are not only imparting scholarship, you are inspiring students themselves to serve. So you get a double hit when you're an educator. I'm so fond of the words of your beloved alum, Dr. King. Anybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to know about Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know the second theory in thermodynamics to serve. He said, all you need is a heart full of grace and a soul motivated by love. So my purpose in life is to serve. Now you get there different ways, you know. I believe being a mom of 3 sons, which is why, you know, that I birthed, having all those daughters from Spelman was so helpful, and now having a 4th son through marriage. I believe that I have been able to serve through the way that I have helped my sons to learn to serve. And in many ways, I've often said my best accomplishment may be growing and helping to raise and mature sons who are feminists may be some of my best work. One of whom is a Morehouse graduate, I am proud to say. So there are different ways that we serve. By the way, let it be clear, I have never believed that every woman must be married, and she sure better have children. In that you hear rank patriarchy. That is all that she really is capable of doing. She better do that. All right? But for women who choose to have children, it can be a means of service. And then we all know that education is one way that one can serve. But you know, you can serve even, I believe, in the corporate world, if you can keep your integrity intact. There are ways that you can do good, that you can turn that which is not just into that which is more just. I believe that being an artist, and I think the three of you will know that I've had an extraordinary blessing in being the director of the National Museum of African Art. I'm deeply committed and in love with the visual arts. I believe the arts, they're an extraordinary way to serve because they teach us, they inspire us, they give us joy, and yes, they help us to feel outrage when it's appropriate. So whatever the three of you have chosen as your fields, and by the way, for your generation, you're going to change now 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. Whatever you're saying now you're going to do and be,
That's very impactful and powerful and inspiring to hear about your service, especially considering uh, your own family legacies who have been of service to the Black community for generations. Thinking about your great-grandfather, the founder of Afro-American Life Insurance, and the economic stability that they brought to the Black community at a time where there wasn't a lot of stability in the Black community, along with other partners like in Atlanta Life, Golden Gate in California, and many other great African American racemen, as you described your great-grandfather. Can you talk about your, I guess, how growing up in that kind of environment, in the midst of racial segregation, in the midst of many Black people facing economic instability, can you talk about how growing up in that environment empowered you to become the woman that you are, or sort of fulfill your life mission and your life goal of service?
well, the first thing that it seems to me it's important to say is that I was intensely fortunate to grow up in an environment where all around me there was a counter narrative to the dominant narrative. Because the dominant narrative was, little black girl, it really doesn't matter what you do. You can only go so far. Because you're just not going to have the intelligence. It's just who your people are. So, do the best you can. There was such a pushback against that narrative that came from Mary Frances Lewis Betch and John Thomas Betch Sr., that came from A.L. Lewis and his son James Henry Lewis, that came from my uncle James Leonard Lewis, that came from Miss Bunny Vance and Miss Morse, that came from Mary McLeod Bethune, that came from my Girl Scout leader, even before that, my Brownie leader. I'm thinking about Olga Bradham. Yesterday. No, it wasn't yesterday. Oh, well, since COVID, days and nights, who knows what day it is. My husband, James Dayton, my brother, John Betch, and I went to an event at the Jacksonville Public Library. It was a very special event in tribute to Dr. Diana L. Green, who has been the superintendent of Jacksonville schools. What a shero. A story you can Google and read about, because it's not pretty why she is no longer the superintendent and felt the need to resign. But as we sat in that very moving program in the Jacksonville Public Library, I was getting very sentimental about libraries, as our people would say, not libraries, libraries. And remembering Olga Bradham. Olga Bradham was the head librarian. Watch what I'm going to say, because I'm going to read the sign. At the A.L. Lewis Colored Library. It was the only library I could go to. But I went there often, and whenever I arrived, Olga Bradham, who was my mother's bestie and her sorority sister of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, her sister friend in the true sense of the word, would have a stack waiting for me. And it was those books that took me around the world, that introduced me to ideas and problems and issues. I'm saying that and now feeling such intense anger that librarians in my country, which claims to be a democratic nation, must deal with the list of banned books. This is not South Africa, when that book was banned because it had the title Black Beauty, and the apartheid government assumed you couldn't put those two words together. Black and beauty didn't go together. The fools didn't know that the book was about a horse. Right? This is not South Africa. This is 2023. And books are being banned. When the writings of our great forces of literature and of science are being banned. You're not to read Toni Morrison. Don't you dare read Alice Walker. This is going on in my country. And so I think about an Olga Bradham, and it's in her name and what she did for me that I am with so many other college presidents and just good old social justice activists pushing back against these outrageous attacks on who we are as a people and on American democracy.
And Dr. Cole, so I thank you so much, but I think I don't want to be too much, this be too much of, because I think this conversation has to go on, and we talked about this, and I think you've given us a good start to think about looking at your life. And so I would just ask questions. So when
Okay.
these students, some of them are going to go off to grad school, but we're going to still call on them, because ask if I won't, because I will. So just in thinking about your life and what you want the students to know, and to go out and find out about you, what do you want? Where do you want them to look? And what do you want them to investigate further as we go forward?
Like a prof would do, posing what appears to be a simple question, and it ain't. I would invite the three of you to explore why in the world did somebody who grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, yes, went to Fisk University at age 15, ended up at Oberlin College, how in the world did she get to be an anthropologist? A word I could hardly pronounce without sounding it out when I first saw it. Because I think if you do that, it's going to open some interesting doors for you. For example, it's going to take you to the Gullah Geechee corridor.
That's going to be my question.
Okay? Because you're going to have to start reading about Lorenzo Turner. And it's going to take you to a book written in 1941 that probably had the greatest influence on my becoming an anthropologist. The Myth of the Negro Past by Melville J. Herskovitz. So that's one thing. The second thing that I would think you'd want to explore is why wasn't anthropology enough? After all, it claims to be this discipline that is the broadest about humankind. It's so broad it's got to have 4 different kinds of itself. But it wasn't enough for me. So why did I have to discover and become one of the founders of one of the first Black Studies programs in our country? Only to discover, well, if this is about Black people, where are all the women in Black Studies? So then, women's studies. So I think understanding my life and my work, you got to see that it takes anthropology, women's studies, and African American studies for me to feel that I'm getting it. And then I think you may want to have a better understanding of my life as a social justice activist. whether it's, it must be, is it 2.5 or 3 years ago now, getting put in jail in Washington because I'm standing in front of the Hart Building. Because NCNW, with others, we're saying, we're here because inside of that building, folk ain't right about voters' rights. All the way back to going to jail with my students at Washington State University. So that whole period of my very clear outward social justice activism is something you may want to look at as well.
I know we have to wrap up, but I guess I wanted to just ask, while we're talking about your activism as a social justice activist, and your entire professional career, even being here in Jacksonville, Florida, the recent things that have been coming out of Florida, that you mentioned the ban on books in the library, and I know that the NAACP has recently put a ban, or has issued a warning to African Americans nationwide saying, don't come to Florida. And you being a resident and a native.
That's not exactly what the NAACP said, though. And that you said that, don't feel badly that I'm correcting you, because I was saying it. It's important for us to understand that that may have been the way the NAACP sort of started, but it's really saying there is an advisory about going to Florida. And so that's different. And because it is an advisory, look who this governor is, and the legislature. I'm a very strong member of ASALH, and ASALH will meet in Jacksonville in September. And we will be there, and I will be there. And it took some reading and understanding for me to move from what was my impression, the same as yours, to what the NAACP is really saying.
Okay.
In ending this conversation, I just really want to ask, we know how the Gullah Geechee corridor starts at Wilmington, North Carolina, and extends down to Jacksonville, and knowing that the Gullah people really are just descendants of West Africans who've been able to retain culture, history, traditions, and customs here in the States. Do you yourself identify as a Gullah Geechee person?
I think each of us must be very careful about how we identify, because nothing can offend black folk as much as some white person trying to act black. And we can certainly understand when indigenous people really are just outraged when somebody is in a stadium going as if that is the culture of indigenous people. And so I'm very careful about how I identify myself. Unlike your sister prof, my sister friend, Dr. Corey, I cannot trace directly to a Gullah Geechee family. But my respect for Gullah Geechee culture is so deep. I would not be the anthropologist if I had not learned, first of all, some of the first stuff I ever learned was about Gullah Geechee culture. I mean, I remember a professor literally in a classroom in Overland College showing us how in Gullah Geechee territory rice would be planted by women in the same way as in West Africa. Wow. And I remember that prof George Eaton Simpson, tall, lanky white man who really introduced me to anthropology, would stand there. I'm not going to get up. And he would say, put your legs down. He would say, just as in West Africa, a woman is going down the road. She's opening the dirt with her heel. She's put in the seed. She closes it with her toe. She opens, puts in the seed, closes it with her toe. That is as West African a way of planting rice as you can. You all know how much of the language is the language of West African people, whether they are Mende or Wolof, whether they are Kisi or whatever is their ethnic group. You know the songs, you know the mourning, all of that. That's what brought me into anthropology. And the book, above all that I read, was Melville J. Herscovitz's The Myth of the Negro Past. Because published in 1941, that was the first full scholarly work. And by the way, there are lots of critiques of Herskovitz. And you can get some of them with me on a great film critiquing Melville J. Herskovitz, okay? But that's not what I'm doing right now. But it was really a book in 1941 that said something so revolutionary, so outrageous, so never before said, that black people did not get on the shores of their native land or stood in the door of no return on Goree Island off of the coast of Senegal, where that 13-year-old Anta Majidin Jai stood, and say, let me dig out everything about me that is African. I'm leaving it here because I'm enslaved and off to the New World. But that is the assumption that scholars made, that we were so different from any other people. We didn't carry with us our culture. Of course we did. And it didn't matter that we were told not to practice our religions. We just found a way. And so we called peanuts by a different name or okra by a different name. But we brought that stuff with us. And when the bell rang in the Catholic Church, and the enslavers thought, look how the enslaved go so well in a disciplined fashion into the church. What, excuse me, what he didn't know was it wasn't that Catholic bell alone. That bell was Legba calling us into worship.
Wow.
So, again, as an anthropologist, as a Floridian, how can I not have deep respect for Gullah Geechee culture?
Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, 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 welcome. I hope I didn't exhaust y'all.
Oh, no, ma'am.
All right.
We could have got more questions.
And I do want to say this, you've been terrific.
Thank you.
I admire your preparation. I admire the spirit in which you posed your questions. And it was very special for me. So I'll be keeping up with you, all right?
Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, and we get to see each other.
Yeah. If you would like, at I think Dr. Emery's.
Oh, I wouldn't miss it. Oh,
We'll see.
I'm
If
a
they're
coming.
They sound like they were doing something in here. I don't know if they're moving it because of the rain or.
Can we get some pictures with you?
I would be hurt if we did.